What if Donald Trump's demand for Canadian water was never about drought relief? What if it was never about helping American states? What if it was about creating new leverage in a trade war that is slipping from his control? Because just days after reports emerged that Trump is considering rolling back his failing tariff policy, the president publicly demanded access to Canadian freshwater resources. And Mark Carney's response did not bend. It did not accommodate. It stunned Washington because it exposed something critical. Trump is running out of tools, and desperation is now replacing strategy. This is no longer about trade negotiations. This is about a president searching for new pressure points after his original tactics collapsed. The demand itself was striking. Donald Trump, during a public appearance, suggested that the United States should have access to Canadian water to address water shortages in drought-affected states. He framed this as a reasonable request between neighbors. He implied that Canada, with its vast freshwater reserves, had a moral obligation to assist. He did not present this as a negotiation. He presented it as an expectation. The language was declarative, the tone was demanding, and the timing was anything but coincidental. Canada controls approximately 20% of the world's freshwater resources. But the water Trump referenced was not about the Great Lakes. It was about northern Canadian rivers, watersheds in British Columbia, and water systems that exist entirely within Canadian territory. These are sovereign resources governed by Canadian law, protected by international agreements, and have never been part of any bilateral trade framework with the United States. Now consider the sequence. Trump imposed massive steel and aluminum tariffs on Canada. Those tariffs triggered economic damage inside the United States. Federal Reserve analysis confirmed that nearly 90% of the cost fell on American businesses and consumers. Trump's approval ratings declined. His trade policy became politically toxic. Reports emerged that the White House was preparing to retreat. And then, just days later, Trump demanded Canadian water. That is not policy coherence. That is scrambling for a new angle. That is what happens when the original strategy fails and there is no backup plan. Mark Carney's response was immediate and unambiguous. In a public statement, he made clear that Canadian water resources are not negotiable. He emphasized that Canada manages its water according to its own environmental and economic priorities. He noted that fresh water is a strategic national asset and that no foreign government has authority over how Canada allocates those resources. He did not raise his voice. He did not escalate rhetorically. He simply restated sovereignty. And that simplicity carried force because it left no room for negotiation. Carney's tone was controlled. He did not mock Trump. He did not accuse. He stated facts. Canadian water belongs to Canada. Canadian law governs Canadian resources. International agreements protect water sovereignty. End of discussion. That clarity is what stunned Washington because it left Trump with nothing. There was no ambiguity to exploit. There was no opening for pressure. There was just a firm statement of jurisdiction, and Trump cannot override jurisdiction with a tweet. The response from Washington revealed institutional discomfort. Environmental policy experts noted that large-scale cross-border water transfers would require congressional approval and compliance with international water treaties. Legal analysts pointed out that the United States and Canada are both signatories to the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909, which governs transboundary water use and prohibits unilateral diversion. Trade experts questioned whether water could even be categorized as a tradable commodity. Republican senators from Western states, who face real water scarcity issues, did not rally behind Trump's statement. Instead, they remained silent. That silence is telling. If this were a serious policy proposal with bipartisan support, lawmakers would have amplified it. But there was no amplification. There was caution. And that caution signals that even Trump's own party sees this as improvisation rather than strategy. Democratic lawmakers were less restrained. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib described the demand as another example of Trump treating Canada as a resource colony rather than a sovereign partner. She noted that Trump's pattern, from threatening the Gordie Howe Bridge to imposing punitive tariffs to now demanding water, reflects fundamental disrespect for Canadian autonomy. Environmental groups warned that any attempt to divert Canadian water could destabilize ecosystems that millions depend on for drinking water, agriculture, and industry. Water management involves hydrology, environmental science, indigenous rights, and long-term sustainability. Trump's demand ignored all of that complexity. It treated water as a bargaining chip. The structural problem for Trump is that he has no leverage. Canada is under no legal obligation to provide water. There is no treaty provision that grants the United States access to Canadian freshwater. There is no trade agreement that includes water as a negotiable resource. And there is no mechanism through which Trump can compel cooperation. He can demand, he can threaten, he can complain, but he cannot force Canada to comply. And that powerlessness is the core of the story. Trump built his political identity on making deals and exerting dominance. But this situation offers no deal structure. Water is not a tariff that can be adjusted. It is not a trade quota that can be renegotiated. It is a sovereign resource that Canada controls. Trump's demand assumes that everything is transactional. But sovereignty is not transactional. And that disconnect reveals the limits of his approach. Mark Carney does not need to escalate because Trump has already overextended. By making a public demand that Canada had no reason to accept, Trump created a situation where refusal was inevitable. Carney's response simply confirmed what was already obvious. Canada will not surrender sovereign resources to appease a foreign leader. That principle is foundational, and by restating it calmly, Carney reinforced Canada's position without giving Trump any rhetorical ammunition. This moment exposes a deeper strategic failure. Trump appears to believe that pressure alone can produce results. But pressure only works when the other side has something to lose by resisting. Canada does not lose by saying no to a water demand. It simply maintains control over its own resources. Trump's pressure has no bite. And when pressure has no bite, it stops being strategy and starts being noise. The timing of this demand matters because it coincides with Trump's tariff retreat. Reports indicate that the White House is preparing to roll back steel and aluminum tariffs after months of economic pain and political backlash. That retreat represents a major credibility loss. It confirms that his trade war hurt Americans more than Canadians. And it shows that Mark Carney's refusal to panic was the correct strategy. Now, just as Trump is forced to back down on tariffs, he is making a new demand that has even less structural support. That pattern suggests desperation, not strength. Desperation creates mistakes. And this water demand is a mistake because it gave Canada another opportunity to demonstrate resolve without cost. Carney did not have to negotiate. He did not have to compromise. He simply had to restate sovereignty. That is the easiest possible win. And Trump handed it to him. The broader implications are significant. This episode reinforces a narrative that Trump is reactive, impulsive, and increasingly ineffective in dealing with Canada. He tried tariffs. They failed. He threatened infrastructure. It backfired. He demanded water. It was refused. Each failure reduces his credibility. Each refusal strengthens Carney's position. And each misstep makes future pressure less credible because the pattern is now clear. Trump threatens, Canada resists, and Trump retreats. Political analysts in the United States are beginning to notice this pattern. Commentary from both conservative and progressive outlets has pointed out that Trump's Canada strategy lacks coherence. He has no clear objective beyond applying pressure. He has no endgame beyond forcing concessions. And he has no plan B when resistance holds. Mark Carney, by contrast, has been consistent. He has diversified trade relationships. He has strengthened Canada's economic resilience. He has maintained institutional discipline. He has refused to be provoked. And he has allowed Trump's chaos to become self-inflicted damage. Carney does not need to attack Trump because Trump is attacking himself. Every failed threat, every reverse tariff, every rejected demand adds to the evidence that Trump's approach is not working. For Canada, this is a moment of strategic clarity. The government does not need to escalate. It simply needs to hold the line. Water is sovereign. Tariffs hurt Americans. Infrastructure is contractually protected. And Canadian strategy is working. Those facts require repetition, not spin. The risk for Trump is that this water demand becomes another case study in overreach. It will be analyzed in the same framework as the Gordie Howe Bridge threat and the tariff reversal. It will be cited as evidence that Trump does not understand limits. And it will be used by his opponents to argue that his foreign policy is driven by impulse rather than analysis. That narrative is politically toxic because it undermines the core claim that Trump is a tough negotiator. Trump attempted to create new leverage by demanding Canadian water. Instead, he created new evidence of weakness. He attempted to pressure Canada into compliance. Instead, he gave Canada another win. He attempted to project dominance. Instead, he exposed desperation. The water demand was supposed to shift the conversation. Instead, it confirmed the pattern. Trump threatens, Canada refuses, and Washington notices. If you value disciplined political analysis that tracks power, leverage, and strategic outcomes, subscribe to Canada Today. We do not follow headlines. We analyze structures. Because the real story is not what leaders say. It is what they cannot accomplish. And right now, Donald Trump cannot accomplish much in Canada. That is the story.